Hi, I'm Meherwan Irani. I'm a chef and restaurateur. My restaurant group is called the Chai Pani Restaurant Group. I'm also a spice merchant. My company is called Spicewalla. And you're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing.
My name is Abhay Dandekar, and I share conversations with talented and interesting individuals linked to the global Indian and South Asian community. It's informal and informative, adding insights to our evolving cultural expressions, where each person can proudly say, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." Hi, everyone. On this episode of Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing, we chat with the co-founder, chef, and CEO of the Chai Pani Restaurant Group, Meherwan Irani. Stay tuned. Once again, a heartfelt thanks to everyone for listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing, and sharing it with your friends and family, and of course for following us on that good old social media. Now, if you're enjoying these conversations, please take a moment to submit a kind rating and review wherever you might be listening or watching, as it's truly appreciated. So I'm often reminded that a part of my own Marathi family found themselves feeling quite at home, welcomed into the culture of the American South, with all of its complexity and history. A while back, my uncle moved to Jackson, Mississippi for many years. We'd visit every now and then, and over time, we certainly noticed a growing Indian American community in the South. My grandmother actually spent her last few years living there, and even though her English was limited, she found a peaceful community there, and even introduced my cousin and many of her non-Indian friends to some of her expert knitting techniques. In a way, the South found a way to embrace her style with comfort and made her feel really at home. Now, for chef and restaurateur Meherwan Irani, he's also found a home in the South, and the South is finding a blossoming comfort and feeling quite at home with his food. Meherwan is from Ahmednagar in Maharashtra, India, was born to a Punjabi mother and a Parsi father, and then emigrated to the US when he was 20. After many jobs and going to business school, Meherwan moved to the South with his wife Molly, where they soon found themselves in the thick of the Great Recession in 2009, in pursuit of a passion to open a restaurant. They quit their day jobs and started Chai Pani as a chat house experience in Asheville, North Carolina. Today, with a growing number of restaurants across several southern U.S. cities and a spice brand called Spicewalla, Meherwan has been changing the perception and creating a new experiential brand of Indian food in America. In 2018, Time magazine named him as one of the 31 people changing the South, and last year, Chai Pani Asheville was named Outstanding Restaurant by the James Beard Foundation. Through a lot of respect to local community and history, and a thoughtful merging of the food cultures of India and the American South, the growing restaurant and spice empire that Meherwan leads has been nurtured with a basic foundation of authenticity, approachability, and in a nutshell, soul. We caught up for a conversation to talk about his very non-linear story, about cultivating success in the South, and even about his role in preparing food at the request of the Vice President this past summer in Washington, D.C. But I first wanted to find out if at heart, Meherwan was a romantic when it comes to Indian street food.
That's a great way of describing it. I've never thought of it that way. I always thought of myself as nostalgic, but, we're nostalgic for many things. And yeah, I do believe I'm a romantic, an obsessive romantic, actually, would be a great way of describing it.
Yeah.
I'm constantly trying to capture that feeling of being in India and, cutting out from class to go and, vada pav at the street corner, hanging out late with your friends in college at the railway station at 2 a.m., having chai and bhel puri. It's for me, it's very much about not just personally capturing those memories, but wanting to then share them with everybody. And the interesting thing about nostalgia, and I guess in this case, so the romantic aspect of nostalgia, is that even for folks that haven't directly experienced it themselves, they recognize it as a thing of its own and kind of get drawn into that a little bit. I think all great endeavors that have that, that can bring nostalgia, sort of appeal to more than just the folks that experienced it. It's a really funny experience I have of watching people say, I've never been to India, but I feel like if I had, this is what it would have felt like.
Well, and do you think that kind of romanticism and that feeling, that kind of undescribable thing that whatever that might be for someone experiencing that 2 a.m. Street food, when people do walk away Is it the same kind of feeling that they get after they're experiencing your food, where they feel sort of like it's, yeah, I can't quite describe it, but I know what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, both for Indians that obviously come to Chai Pani, for Indians that grew up in America, that have heard their families and their parents, and have heard the stories of their sort of ancestors, if you will, growing up in India. And then for folks
Yeah,
that have just never been, but have always been sort of, fascinated by the culture, by the storytelling, they come to our restaurants and it's an immersive experience. It's not just the food, sort of everything around them. I want them to feel like it's a trip down memory lane. I
yeah,
mean, for example, in Chai Pani, all over the walls are pictures of the village that I grew up in and the town that I
yeah,
grew up in, and some of the people I actually personally know.
yeah,
And because even though I have that connection,
right,
it conveys. Folks can tell, oh, this isn't just the posters that the tourism department of India shipped over from Melbourne to put up on the wall, camels in the
right,
mist and elephants and all that stuff. I mean,
yeah,
there's a sense, I mean, there's one picture of an old, I mean, the man must be 90 at this point, bangle-wala, the little glass
yeah,
bangles
yeah,
that women wear in India. And I took my daughter there to get her first set of bangles.
yeah.
And, there's a picture of him on the wall too. So it's really personal. And I think people pick up on that.
So in that same spirit, right, you have these kind of visual sparks
Mm-hmm.
of that feeling in the restaurant and sort of all around you. But is it important sometimes for you to particularly kind of keep accelerating that? Is it important for you to be reminded in a way of that romanticism? And if it is, then, so how do you kind of capture those reminders? How do those reminders actually in some ways kind of keep the process going?
Well, I mean, opening Chai Pani made me fall back in love with India again. I mean, I
Yeah,
left when I was 20 and opened Chai Pani when I was 40. So for 20
right.
years, I had really sort of slowly lost a connection to India as a country and only just went there to visit my family. I
Yeah,
mean, going home was always nostalgic and always wonderful, and but opening this restaurant really reconnected me back with
yeah,
India. And it's, again, maybe for your listeners, this might be sort of unusual to imagine that most of us growing up in India don't know our country that well.
right.
Growing up, especially in the 70s and 80s, the transportation to get from point A to point B wasn't what it is today.
Yeah,
People were very parochial. People were very, provincial. You stayed where you stayed, and for
yeah,
a number of reasons, not just transportation or because of the geography. It's like your community is so different.
yeah,
It would be like if you were, I often say that Gujarat is as different from Kerala as Spain is from,
yeah,
France. I mean,
right.
there's some similarities in the people, but at the end of the day, they're two very distinct cultures. So being in the restaurant, experiencing sort of both the nostalgia of the folks that have grew up in India that have come to Chai Pani and recapture that, for me to then go back and experience that myself in different places of India has been really the most interesting part of this journey. I mean, I can't wait to go back. Every time I go, I'm like, I got to go
Right.
back again. Yeah. And I didn't used to feel that way before I opened the restaurant.
And that I imagine is what sort of love is all about, right? I mean, it's like you cannot wait to constantly get more and more reminders and kind of fodder to keep that
Mm-hmm.
sort of romantic feeling alive. And for me, when I was thinking a little bit about your story, I'm gonna try at least to connect the dots of growing up in the middle of Maharashtra and Ahmednagar, with that Parsi Punjabi background, to working at an auto dealership in San Francisco, and then going to Vix in Berkeley, and
You're right.
and now sort of life as a restaurateur and cultivating a spice empire in the South. It almost seems like if I had to sort of like think about this carefully, it almost seems like that classic American bear puri story. That's a lot more layered when you build it and
Mm-hmm.
you put it all together than just a straight line.
Yeah, I mean, I've always argued that Indians that come to America, immigrate here, come here on two tracks. One is the straight line.
Yeah,
One is you're here to be a doctor, an engineer. It used to be electrical engineering, then mechanical engineering, and now
right,
it's
right.
obviously computer engineering
Yeah,
and software. And then there's another group that comes here purely on, I'd say, on commercial chops, right? They don't have the academic chops to do that thing, so they come here and they open businesses. And there's a huge range, obviously, in that, but it still blows my mind, like you said, how it's never a straight line for that particular journey. And I think that's one of the distinct and unusual features of the Indian diaspora in America that comes here on the basis of commerce and venture, is that they're some of the most fearless when it comes to commerce and venture compared to many other diasporas. And obviously I'm not generalizing or stereotyping here, but I've spent a lot of time watching how sort of, certain segregated ghettos form for various communities where, they want to be in that community. They want to just stay, sometimes barely even speak language. I mean, the Bay Area is a perfect example of that, like Chinatown, for example, right? I mean, and everything down to the Sunset for the longest time, I'd meet folks that have been here for 30 years and that never even spoke the language, didn't need to.
Yeah.
Indians don't really do that. There's not a lot of India towns. There's certain cities that have a larger concentration of Indians than average, usually wherever there's any kind of tech to be found, right?
Right.
But we're fearless in the sense that you'll be in the middle of nowhere in the deep South, and you come into a gas station. There's an Indian gentleman there. And you go, what are you doing here? And they're like, well, we saw an opportunity. So we came. I'm like, aren't you alone? Yes, but it's okay. We're doing this for a greater purpose, for the kids, for sending money back home, for whatever it is. And so, to your point, because of that ethos of fearlessness, I think it's never a straight line, and it certainly was not for me.
Is that empire building then born out of sort of fearlessness? And,
absolutely.
And what is it like to sort of build that empire now, if you will, with the fearlessness, with that sort of purpose, with that sense that there's almost an intrepid quality to it?
I mean, my first enterprise, in this, what I do now, Chai Pani, before that I was sort of more on the, trying to make it on academic chops, trying to make came here to do my MBA, and wandered around sort of wearing a suit and tie, trying to find a normal path to whatever my destiny was supposed to be. I opened an Indian street food restaurant in 2009 at the height of the Great Recession in a town in western North Carolina in the Appalachian Mountains with 99,000 white people and maybe 3 Indians. And I opened an Indian street food restaurant. So that speaks to that, and I didn't even think of it in terms of being fearless. It just seemed that I think there's an opportunity here, and I think I'm well suited to take advantage of that opportunity. So that similar mindset, once you're successful at it one time, continues to sort of, apply itself forward. The whole spice thing was purely an opportunity base also. Yeah. But I'm really careful to make sure that I don't venture into areas where I'm not sure if I'm good at it. Yeah. Where I'm not sure if I have, saying I'm good at it isn't even quite the right way of describing it. We all are a collective bundle of our experiences, our upbringing, our environment, and our wins and losses. So knowing that just because I was good at this doesn't mean I'm good at that. Yeah. No shade on your profession. No shade on your profession, but I don't have a God complex at all.
I mean, and the funny part is that like knowing your limits, knowing your boundaries doesn't always have to equate to not being adventurous, right?
Oh, absolutely. You just know where to go poking around. Where to go looking, and that's why I think, again, Indians that come here and start enterprises are always successful. They know what they're good at. And yet they don't limit their options just because they know what they're good at.
You're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. After a quick break, we'll come back to our conversation with Meherwan Irani. Stay tuned. Every story told is a lesson learned, and every lesson learned is a story waiting to be told. I'm Abhay, and I share conversations with global Indians and South Asians so everyone can say, trust me, I know what I'm doing. New episodes weekly, wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Hey, this is Cal Penn. I'm an actor, author, former public servant, and and you're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. I'm Kai von Schroff, a Democratic political commentator and public interest attorney, and you're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing.
Welcome back to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. Let's rejoin our conversation now with the CEO and co-founder of the Chai Pani Restaurant Group, Meherwan Irani. I'm thinking about even developing, the feeling of being good at something. I read a piece where you mentioned that your mom cooked not just with love, but with expertise.
Absolutely.
The idea of getting good at something, especially with Indian street food or Indian cooking, that's just so tethered and anchored in this concept of andaaz or instinct, right? Specifically to, try and generate a delicious morsel, whether that's in the home or on the street. Is that sometimes prone by some, to perceive it as being without precision or rigor?
Oh, I see what you mean.
You know what I mean?
Andaaz instinct.
Yes. And therefore it's tough for someone to perceive that you're quote unquote good at something.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, we all joke about trying to get a recipe from an auntie or mom in India. It's never going to be complete. And, and 9 times out of 10, they'll use that word andaaz, means, just by feel, by instinct,
right.
For this measurement or that or the other. But what we don't recognize is that that person has honed their craft to where, just as, from Djokovic to Michael Jordan, they don't think about what they're doing in the moment. They're just doing it. And when you ask them, can you break it down step by step for me? It's very hard for them to describe it. Right. And it's the same way, I think, with these aunties and moms in India that are really good at what they're doing. It's not just instinct, is they have spent 30 years honing their craft, and they have an intuition about flavor and about ingredients and about almost a sixth sense, if you will, on what something needs that just takes time and practice. I mean, that whole, 10,000 hours
right.
Really counts even in cooking. In fact, I would argue very much so in cooking. And I think a lot of people seem to think that, it's an instinct, or it's just you either have it or you don't have it. And I was like, dude, no.
Yeah, you want to reproduce the taste of that pav bhaji wala on the street.
Exactly.
There is a true rigor and a true science to the muscle memory that's involved there.
Absolutely.
I'm curious about, we were talking a little bit about romanticism and nostalgia, and how do you balance in some ways kind of like how you've gone through this pathway to not just recreating the nostalgia, but of course now bringing an innovation to it and blending in new pieces so that it's not just simply recreating a memory, but in fact making new memories too.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll take it back to my mom, who just over and over again demonstrated to me that the goal here isn't tradition or authenticity.
Yeah.
Authenticity in the traditional sense that, this dish is only authentic because of these ingredients or this cooking technique. She really helped me understand that more authentic than that is being aware of where you are when you're doing what you do. That a sense of place matters. That you can't just transpose something from the streets of India into the deep south of America and expect to do it exactly the same. It wouldn't be authentic.
Yeah.
And I feel many Indian restaurants, that's what they try to do.
Right.
They try to recreate something that belongs in a different place, but doesn't necessarily quite fit, where they are, because it was never meant to be. It was meant to be, let me transport you somewhere else.
Right.
And I was really conscious of that when I opened Chai Pani until today, is that a sense of place matters. Like where you are, the people around you, the ingredients, the aesthetics of the place, the zeitgeist in the air. If you don't incorporate that into what you're doing, then you're always going to be other than. And the proof is in the pudding. I mean, Chai Pani has been acknowledged as one of the essential Southern restaurants, or one of the essential restaurants in the South, because I think people recognize that I've been able to bring both these worlds together.
I'm curious about what has the kind of cultural experience? You mentioned that the geography is important, the place is important,
Mm-hmm.
the sort of cultural milieu is important. What is the cultural experience of living in the South, in fact, taught you about Indian food?
Yeah, when I first came here, I spent a little bit of time in the South. I did my MBA at the University of South Carolina in Columbia, but wasn't really immersed. I mean, I was just sort of like dropped in, right? And
Yeah,
by the time I even figured out what I was doing, I had left and gone to California.
right.
And I know we like to think of California as having a culture, but it takes coming back to the South, one of the sort of older parts of America with a far longer, deep history and culture, not all of it pretty, understandably so, for me to recognize like, oh, there is history, there's tradition, there's culture, especially when it comes to the way people look at food. Way more so than I felt there was in California, where
Hmm.
it just felt like, food and cuisine in California was constantly about experimentation, pushing boundaries, and sort of trying to incorporate new things. Over here,
Yeah,
not at all, at least when I first arrived here. The South is about hanging on tight to its, to its detriment. So it helped me both recognize the importance of integrating culture into cuisine. I know it gets a lot of lip service. I mean, one would imagine, well, if you're cooking Indian food, isn't that a cultural experience? I'm like, absolutely not. There's plenty of Indian restaurants where there's zero cultural experience. Just
right.
because you got, again, the camels and the mist on the wall and sitar music in the background and food being brought out in some sort of, fancy silver platter,
Right.
that doesn't mean that's culture.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that because there almost is a cultural experience unto itself of the buffet style Indian restaurant that's trying to evoke that memory in the first place.
Oh, absolutely. You do something long enough, that in itself develops its own
Yeah,
subculture. Yeah. I mean, I argue that the typical Indian experience in America, I mean, at least, can be enjoyed for its own sake.
right. Was the notion of learning from the culture of the South, did that kind of come as a surprise for you?
It did, mostly because I hadn't really paid attention to it.
Yeah,
I didn't grow up really thinking about culture in India, especially as it relates to food,
yeah,
and how much what we eat in India is at the is essential to our identity.
yeah,
Not as Indians, but as the community we're from. Whether you're a Parsi or a Punjabi or a Gujarati or somebody from Andhra, food plays such a huge role in religion, spirituality,
yeah,
the times of the year that we celebrate, how we mourn the passing of the departed. All
yeah,
of that, food is a central role. And it was always in the background for me, and I just never paid a lot of attention to
mm,
how integrated that was. So coming to the South and seeing how much folks here identify their sense of culture with how they treat their food, how they preserve and pickle, how they store for the winter, how they
yeah,
grow their crops, the unique ingredients here that they use that they're very proud of as Appalachian ingredients.
yeah,
Started got me thinking about where I grew up and started looking at Maharashtra through
yeah,
a completely different lens. There was a lot of commonalities I found between both the Maharashtrian culture, because I want to be careful for listeners to not confuse, what we're talking about with all of India, because we all know
right,
that culturally we're so different,
yeah,
even where you came from and I came from. So when I looked at Maharashtra, I realized like there was a similar aesthetic of subsistence and survival,
yeah,
and using food, I'll back up, extracting the most you could out of what was at hand.
yeah,
Maharashtra has a great sort of culinary lineage of preserving and drying and pickling and alliums and ground nuts and
sure,
chili peppers because of the arid, dry climate, especially once you get up to where I was, central
yeah,
Maharashtra in the Deccan Plateau. So I became hyper aware of that after I came here and saw the sort of how integral food was to how people look at being, what their culture is and around here and their heritage and their traditions.
yeah. No, no, no. Of course, I was thinking about your Chai Pani experience and how it was sort of born out of a fleeting but very timely whim, and sort of like that flashing spark to follow your passion. But In the journey so far, what has the business in some ways taught you about patience and strategy and consistency that in fact is anything but a fleeting piece or anything but a whim? How have those set factors now kind of played a role for your success as well?
The thing that's changed from 14, 13 years ago is how many more people are dependent on me making the right decisions.
Yeah.
And the original whim would have affected just me and Molly.
Right.
But any whim today affects 350 people.
Right.
In significant ways, and whose livelihood is, at least while working for me, is dependent on me not making decisions. So yes, things are far more processed and far more how do you say linear, thought through. But
Yeah.
I'm still, our number one, if you look at the sort of our business principles, the set of like sort of core principles that I've just developed over 14 years of why things have worked out the way they are. Number one is we want to grow meaningfully. And when again, I don't want to get into the weeds with this, but for the mission of Chai Pani, if you will, as a business, is meaningful growth that's aligned with what we value.
Yeah.
But if you're going to grow, change is essential. So my number one mantra is be comfortable with being uncomfortable, be okay with being uncertain. And as long as we're okay with that, then we can not be afraid to say, ooh, what if we tried this? Or what if we did that? Because we told ourselves it's okay to feel slightly nervous or uncomfortable when we say these things, because it could rock the whole boat or tip things, or it could be a bad decision. But it allows us to not be constrained by the fear of screwing up, because we've given ourselves permission to be uncomfortable with just even talking about things that if we screwed up would be bad. So I'm a big, not believer is not the right word. I'm a big advocate of frameworks. My major in my MBA was organizational structure.
Yeah.
And the structure comes naturally to me, and I love the idea that even uncertainty and risk and crazy ideas, you can create a framework for how to deal with them and think about them. And that is far more, that you'll get far more success out of that than just not going somewhere because like, ooh, well, that sounds scary, or that could screw us up, or what, the what ifs that happen.
I wonder if that framework, controlled chaos or being sort of uncomfortably comfortable or comfortably uncomfortable, whichever version you want. I wonder if that framework allows you to also grow with tremendous consistency and therefore allows the people that you lead to have that same kind of ethos in mind and therefore scale.
Yeah, you'd mentioned consistency earlier also when we were talking about, you got to be really good at what you do. If we've discovered what people want from us, then they want it exactly the same way over and over and over again.
Right.
So whether it's, a dish in a restaurant, or whether it's the experience that we're giving them, or whether it is what we know people connect and engage with, you have to learn how to consistently deliver that. Even a company can constantly have new products.
Right.
But some things they have to be very consistent in, the delivery, does it work perfectly 100% of the time? Can you follow up on the promises you just made? Those things don't change, those are factors that are just universal, and you can't go around changing those. So yes, it allows us to be successful and have a greater chance of successful because we can differentiate the things that can't change, your North Star, this is what people want, and look at the new ideas and the new things you have and fit them within that framework of, well, but it's still got to be successful. And we know what the things are that we can do well to make it successful, whether we're selling spices or smoked barbecue or coffee rolls.
You're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. After a quick break, we'll come back to our conversation with Meherwan Irani. Stay tuned. Conversation. It's the antidote to apathy and the catalyst for relationships. I'm Abhay, and I share conversations with global Indians and South Asians, so everyone can say, trust me, I know what I'm doing. New episodes weekly, wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Hi everyone, this is Sid Sriram. I have an album titled Siddharth, and it's coming out on August 25th. And you're now listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing.
Hi everyone, my name is Prachi Shivgaonkar. I'm the founder of Cool the Globe, an app and a movement for climate action. And you're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing.
Hi there, I'm Abhay, and you're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. Let's rejoin our conversation now with the CEO and co-founder of the Chai Pani Restaurant Group, Meherwan Irani. Let me ask you this. Your work, of course, has been recognized in, high praise, not just, verbally, but of course with, awards and accolades. And these are things that now you and your team have accumulated. But what you perhaps maybe have to let go of in order to make the Chai Pani Group successfully scale?
It was interesting. What I had to let go of was the discomfort I had as making myself, if you will, the face of the business. Right. When we started this, we started it as a team. It was me, my wife. I didn't see myself as some, a chef that had paid his dues, by going to the CIA and working at some of the finest restaurants in America or the world, and finally set out to open my own thing. And the team they've assembled, the majority of which are still with us in our executive team from day one. They'd worked as hard as I had to see this vision come true. But as the years went by and the accolades started piling up, it became obvious that the media narrative that they want, what works for them is a personality. I mean, that's what they want to focus on. That's what they want to. So I had to learn how to sort of, put myself into the spotlight, if you will, and embrace it. And had to learn how to do it in a way where it didn't change the essential nature of who I am and how the businesses operate. And I think that is one of the big pitfalls in any kind of notoriety or celebrity or on any scale is you start doing things differently than what made you successful in the first place. So, if anything, the accolades, the notoriety, the media sort of attention made me even more disciplined to not let go of the way our team functions, the way we celebrate each other internally, the way we give credit to each other than ever before. I mean, people comment like, you are even more sort of generous with your praise for the team than used to be in the old days. Like, because there's a far greater need for it now than there used to be back in the day. So that's one of the things that has definitely changed.
Yeah. I'm wondering, you were invited this past summer to prepare the sort of luncheon in DC at the request of the vice president and, for the visiting India delegation.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about that moment. What did that moment kind of represent for you?
It was a very interesting moment because I had these instant mixed feelings about, at this point, everything we do, everything I do personally, just going back to what I just said, I feel like reflects on the entire business, right?
Yeah.
And Prime Minister Modi of India is a polarizing character, right?
Sure.
You got folks that would be honored to cook for him and think it's the greatest privilege in the world, and then you all got another set of folks that would want nothing to do with the guy.
Right.
So regardless of where my personal and political affiliations are, I just realized I had to tread that very carefully.
Yeah.
And the best way that I was able to reconcile why it was important to do this was by recognizing that I'm an American citizen now. I mean, I may have been from India, but this is my country. This is the country I chose, and it accepted me. And my government, our vice president and the Secretary of State has asked me to do something to host, a guest from another country. I don't care who that person is.
Right.
It is quite possibly one of the greatest honors that I will ever receive in my life, is being asked to come and do this at that level. And and that was just when I first got the call. Then after that, there's a follow-up call where all of a sudden I'm on the phone with Vice President Harris talking about the menu and recognizing that, this is an important moment for both countries in this particular time.
Yeah.
India is hugely important in both its economy, its size, its politics. It's the world's oldest democracy was meeting the world's largest democracy at a global stage where things are very fraught with a lot of tension and
Sure.
the potential for things to go wrong. And I had to play some small part of that by not screwing up the meal. Right?
It's all dependent on the pani puri, right?
Samosa diplomacy, right?
Well, and I imagine that there was probably, certainly mixed polarizing feelings, but at the same time, a lot of, in many ways, kind of professional patriotism that probably played a role there.
Absolutely. And, there was professional patriotism both for India, the country where I came from, and for America. Like, at the end of the day, I had to put the people out of the way and say, I am representing both this country that's not my home and making a connection with the country that I came from. Yeah. Let's just get the politicians out of the way and just look at it from
just have some lunch.
Yeah. How often in life do you have an opportunity to be there at a moment where, you have these two great countries sort of, trying to connect with each other. And the other thing that my biggest takeaway was the absolute restoration of faith in our civil service. I mean, we're so influenced by watching our politicians on TV that we forget that underneath all of that rhetoric and bullshit is a group of civil servants that are there because they actually care. Yeah. They're running the Department of Energy. They're running the Department of Science. They're running the state. And the State Department is the face of America to the world. Right. And everybody there truly believed in this idea that no matter what your differences were, your ideological differences, your political differences, your moral differences with, another country, another leader of another country, the only way to resolve them was to sit down and have a conversation. Yeah. And that's what diplomacy at the end of the day it is. And even though it may seem like it's a futile effort, like, we'll never see eye to eye on anything, the fact that you try is what matters. Because the minute you give up, it's over. There's no common ground ever to be found. And there's that old saying, it doesn't work until it does. Right. And doing this was part of that process of like, you just talk and you talk and you talk and you try to find some movement where you can meet, and move the needle, whether on any of these issues. So it really left me with a sense of, I was just so taken by the mission and so everybody I met, how deeply they cared about the idea of just sitting down and talking with other people.
Well, and especially as food being your food, grown, from such a terrific background and now in many ways kind of developed and cultivated and perfected in the South with that background and being a facilitator for those connections, for that conversation, must have been amazing. I was trying to think of the Chai Pani group and come up with some sort of word jumble for lots of descriptors that, come to mind when people are trying to describe your food. And I was thinking about the words or the phrases that may be included there. And particularly what came to mind were things like homegrown, spicy, humble, comfortable, delicious, stereotype shattering, visionary, ambitious, authentic. And now all those words and all those phrases maybe are describing the food and the kind of work. But are all of these kind of perhaps equally descriptive of you?
Oh, wow. That's a big word jumble you just dropped there.
I mean, because if the food and the process is mirroring in a way who you are, then are those equally, is that an adequate word jumble of perhaps how maybe you or maybe, Molly or those who are very close to you, is that how they might describe you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think the one word that I would probably have the most complicated feelings about is visionary, because it makes it sound sort of more grandiose than it really is. I mean, I just believe, that the word vision is the most sort of misunderstood word in business and in society and in culture, right? Yeah. And I really, it's funny. I mean, I agree with the rest of those words. I mean, it's meant to be comfortable. It's stereotype shattering, not for what, in terms of Indian food can be this too, and in fact, it is this, and it's not just that, but it's not a stereotype that's being shattered. Well, the stereotype was created, and I understand why it was created, because things just were the way they were. Yeah. So it's again, the time was right, the place was right. Had the right confluence of events in my life and my childhood to where I showed up in a place where I just kind of stepped into it, and if anything in my life had been slightly different, I don't think I would have been visionary enough to come up with what we ended up coming up with. But when I really stopped and thought about what vision means and what a visionary means, it's essentially you have a core ideology and what I'd say an envisioned future. And my core ideology, was essentially to use food as an act of service and sort of to do good in the world. And the envisioned future is that, well, why can't it be Indian food? And why can't, it be the cuisine that changes the way people perceive this country that I love so much, that I came from here in one of the other great countries of the world. So, if that's what visionary means, that's what I've been working on. Anything past that, I think I just got lucky.
Well, Meherwan, that core ideology, that commitment to service, and of course, the vision that you have had and continue to have, I know is exciting a lot of people around you and those who are coming to know of your work for the first time and many times over. Thank you so much for joining us. This was really a treat. I'm sure we could have talked for a lot longer, but I hope we'll be able to visit with you again down the road.
Oh, this is amazing. It was an absolute treat. Loved it. Great questions and a lot there for me to still unpack away after this conversation, which is how it was a good conversation. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for inviting me to do this.
Thanks again, Meherwan. And please check out his work at Chai Pani Restaurant Group.com. Till next time, I'm Abhay.